Well, good evening, everybody. You all are the remnant that have survived this study with all of its interruptions, and thank you for your faithfulness on that. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we give you thanks indeed for your faithfulness to us and for this story that we've been reading, this reminder of the words of your gospel that tell us about the one who died for us. Thank you for this. May we be brought by your Spirit to a place of learning tonight, and then will you speak to us. We ask it in your name. Amen. So we have a few chapters to go, both in Mark's Gospel and in Keller's really good treatment of it. Before we go any further, let's take just a minute and do a little check here. Overall, have you enjoyed Dr. Keller's book? Yeah, okay, super. What have you found the most helpful about it?
Just a new
TJ?
perspective.
Yeah.
Looking at it from a different angle and discovering, depths that were not occurring.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Wasn't that a good one on sacrifice, John? That's just really, really powerful. It's interesting because having been at the same seminary as Tim Keller, I hear echoes of some of the things I learned there, and I came to realize afterwards what an incredible gift that school was, and the ability to train pastors to think biblically in ways that some other seminaries are not quite so strong on. So it was a wonderful gift for that. He starts chapter 16 with a great illustration, I hope you remember it, of seeing a little old lady coming down the street at night carrying a big purse. And you realize she would be a pretty easy target. But you don't knock her over and grab her purse. Why not? He said, because doing that would make you a really despicable person, and that would dishonor you and your family. People would despise you for picking on the weak. You would despise yourself for that. It wouldn't be strong. And this is a pretty self-regarding response. There's a second train of thought, though, that he says, based on this study. You would imagine how painful it would be to be mugged, how hard it would be for the woman if she depended on this money in her purse and it was taken from her. You ask yourself, if I mug her, what will happen to her? What will happen to the people who depend on her? So all else being equal, you would want her to have a good life, so you don't do it. That's another regarding ethic. It's very different from the more reasoning of sort of shame and an honor culture. And he shares this, and then he says, okay, so this professor then asks his students, how many of you would take the purse? And nobody will do it. But then he says, but why not? Why wouldn't you take the purse? Why wouldn't you mug her? And that, which train of thought is it? Because if I do it, it'll dishonor me, or if I do it, it will dishonor her, and it will rob her of something. And of course, most everybody says, well, it's the second. It's not just about me, it's about her. But then he says this, when you put the other person ahead of you, whether you know it or not, this idea comes from Christianity. Your morals have been shaped by the Christian faith. An ethical system based on honor is a self-regarding ethic, while one based in charity is another regarding ethic. With honor goes a concentration on pride rather than humility, dominance rather than service, courage rather than peaceableness, glory rather than modesty, loyalty rather than respect for all, generosity for one's friends rather than true equality. Now, this is an interesting observation. It's an interesting way to sort of get at something. And if you've lived overseas, if you've lived particularly in a non-Christian culture, if you've lived in a perhaps a Muslim culture or some other religious group culture, you may realize some of these differences in the way people think. We think everybody thinks alike, but they don't. And so the way people treat for others is really dependent upon what has been your moral frame of foundation reference. And Keller says that the difference between these two motivations is the difference between a Christian and a non-Christian moral code. If you live in the kingdom of God, and let's stop for a minute. The kingdom of God is, by the way, not a democracy, is it? It's not the Republic of God. It's the kingdom of God. That means it's a monarchy, right? It's a benevolent monarchy, but it's a monarchy, okay? If you live in the kingdom of God, you live by a different set of values and goals, one that is almost the reverse of the world's standard. And in Mark 14, what we see is these two competing visions, these two competing values come crashing together in the Garden of Gethsemane. So let's pick it up in Mark chapter 14, and we're going to pick up in verse 32. This is after the Last Supper. This is when they have gone out to the Mount of Olives. Jesus has already predicted Peter is going to deny him. So, verse 32 and verse 14. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter and James and John. You remember the Kingston trio here. And he began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." Going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." He came and found the disciples sleeping. He said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Did you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again, he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy. They didn't know what to say to him. He came a third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." So let's figure it out. Where are we now as all this is happening? We're in the Garden of Gethsemane, which was an industrial olive grove down on the western slope of the Mount of Olives. You may remember that we talked about this last week. Here is the temple in Jerusalem. This is sort of the city walls. This is a little valley called the Kidron Valley, really more of a ravine. And across the Kidron is the Mount of Olives. He's been staying at Bethany with his friends Mary, Martha, and their brother, the not so late Lazarus. And he's come over the Mount of Olives for the triumphal entry on his last week. He's going back over that. And now, after having observed the Last Supper, somewhere down in this area, we're not exactly sure where, although if you go to Israel, they'll point to a room for you. And if you don't like it, then they'll point to a different one. But he's gone back across the Kidron to this area, the Garden of Gethsemane. It's not the first time they've been there, by the way. John 18 tells us Jesus took his disciples there earlier to teach them how to pray. But this time it's different. How appropriate this place is. the name Gethsemane comes from what actually happens in that spot. It is where the shemen, the olives, are put into a press, which is got shemeni. It's the place of the olive press. The resulting oil is used for food, for cooking, for lighting fuel, you make soap out of it. You can use it for medicine. In other words, olive oil has a really, really important role to play. And after the olives are harvested from those huge trees, you would then put them in either a basin that used a large rolling stone, such as this one, to sort of crush them. You think of a gigantic circular nutcracker, and you've got it. Or you would put them into a basket, kind of like this one, that would use, you put all the olives in a basket. You have a huge stone on top of it. There's a lever over here that's going to push that basket down. It's going to crush the olives inside of the basket. It can be powered by humans going around in a circle with it, or more likely by some sort of a pack animal, a mule, donkey, something that has a little bit more strength in it. Okay. We're not sure what kind of type of press was at the Garden of Gethsemane, but the principle is the same. You squeeze them until all the olive juice is extracted out of them. It flows down into some sort of a storage vat. Why is this appropriate for what's happening here? Why is it appropriate that Jesus is at Gat Shemeni? He's being pressed down as well, isn't he? It's like he's one of the olives being sort of processed through this whole thing, as if he himself is being pressed, squeezed, crushed by the mechanical force of an olive press. Jesus looks over the ravine to the west, and what does he see? The outline of the temple, a place of sacrifice. Jesus knows he's headed there. On the other hand, if he looks backwards, and let me just go back for a minute. So from here, he looks over, can see the temple. It's not very far, okay? But if he looks this way, what does he see? The Mount of Olives? What's on the other side of Bethany? Anyone know? It's the Judean wilderness. I mean, it comes on you really fast from there. It is the empty isolation of that Judean wilderness. In 45 minutes, Jesus can walk up the Mount of Olives, go over the ridge, and be here. Okay. They'll never find him here. A person could hide there for decades. This is where the Unabomber would have gone if he'd been in the first century, okay? Because it is so desolate, so isolated. It looks like the moon, doesn't it? And when you're out there, there's crevices, there's crooks, there's caves, there's all kinds of things. And so this is what I think struck me the most when I was in Israel for the first time, was to realize how close this is to the city, how close this is to where Jesus is praying. So he prays, Father, if it be possible, take this cup from me. Well, it's very possible. All Jesus has to do is get up and walk over the hill. David hid there when Saul was out to kill him. It's very possible. But instead, Jesus looks westward. He returns to his faithful disciples, Simon Peter, James, and John, and discovers that, lo and behold, they are Methodist. Because despite all of the spiritual goings on, they have fallen fast asleep, okay? I used to tell some people that at the end of my sermons, there's sometimes a great awakening. And you know, I mean, I understand it. And I gotta say, I'm never offended when people sleep in church. I just think, you know, they really need the rest. And I'm glad we can, help them with that and give them this little hour of their week when they don't have to worry about it and they can just kind of snooze off. It doesn't offend me. If I sometimes I want to say, keep it down, folks. There's people sleeping, Don't sing so loud. But this is not just a one-time occurrence, is it? Jesus wakes them up. He goes back to pray. He comes back to find them asleep again. Okay, so he wakes them up again, goes back to pray, comes back to find them asleep again. Now, it's one thing if you fall asleep once in class. It's bad if you fall asleep. You fall asleep in the same class 3 times, your professor is not going to be all that excited about you. I had a student this past summer for when I teach for Perkins, and I gave him an A minus, and he was just absolutely floored by this. It's going to lower his whole GPA. He said, "I thought, really, how can that even be possible? That's going to lower your GPA?" He said, "Why do you give me an A minus?" I want to say, because you were asleep most of the class. Okay, now I knew it was a long drive for him, so it didn't bother me. But I'm thinking, This has got to bother Jesus, don't you think? I mean, this is the most critical night of his life. He's up there sweating blood and tears, and they're snoozing. So what's going on here? Why can't the disciples stay awake? All that tryptophan and the Passover, oy vey. They had turkey and then they had a chocolate shake. It's dark. They're tired. They don't know what's coming, do they? No. It's one more night. But there's something else going on for them. They are worn out. They're just absolutely worn out. It has been a tense week. They're overcome with grief. They know something's coming, and it's not going to be good. All the writing's on the wall for that one. That's understandable, isn't it? They're just, in the end, Jesus tells us it's because the spirit may be willing, but sometimes the flesh is weak. Maybe you've known that in your life too. It's interesting, Jesus chides them, but not really. It's more of desperation, isn't it? Couldn't you stay awake with me, for an hour? I'm not asking for a whole lot here, guys. But they can't. And why can't they? Because they've allowed the circumstances of their lives to overwhelm them. Sleep is their refuge from this. So Jesus simply tells them, wake up. And just as he tells them to wake up, he says, because we have company. Okay. Let's read on. Verse 43. Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign saying, the one I will kiss is the man, arrest him and lead him away under guard. So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and kissed him. And they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to them, have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me, as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching. You did not arrest me then. But let the scriptures be fulfilled. And all of them deserted him and fled. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him. He left the linen cloth and he ran off naked. Well, so who's come to the garden this night? That's some of our old friends from the story, isn't it? It is the chief priests, the archieron. It is the scribes, the grammate, are those who can write, who are the sort of grammar people who have been following him from the beginning. And it is the elders, the presbyteros. That's not the same as Presbyterians, but that's where the word comes from. Okay. Why does Judas do the whole kiss thing? Why didn't he just point and say, he's the one? Fulfill prophecy? Maybe. Did he betray with a kiss? Although that's not a real strong prophecy. Is it because maybe Judas has already begun thinking in terms of a different kingdom? One that is marked by swords and clubs like the ones the soldiers are carrying. And thinking that way, Judas is expecting Jesus is going to react in kind. In other words, he thinks he's going to fight back. And that sounds terrible, doesn't it? It sounds like we just strangled a calf back there. Okay.
Yeah, just kicked it.
Judas is apparently somewhat right. For in response to the attempt to arrest Jesus, one of the disciples draws a sword. Wait, let's stop a minute. It says it was his sword. What's a disciple doing walking around with a sword in the first place? Yeah, I mean, yeah, he would have been packing today, He takes his sword. It's not even like he gets the better of a Roman guard and grabs his sword. He has his own sword. He takes it. He cuts off the ear of one of the servants of the high priest. Well, that's going to do a lot, isn't it? Yeah. Which disciple was it? Mark doesn't say. Probably out of respect for his source, John does. John says it is Simon Peter. Why would Peter take such an action? Because he's Peter, okay? TJ, that's very cynical about poor Simon Peter. I mean, yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, he does have a certain brashness about him, doesn't he? He's a bull in a china shop. He's the guy you want in your church, but you don't want to sit by him, okay? Because you're going to need him sometime, but, can you just stay over there, And then when we need you, we'll unleash you and you can go forth, Maybe that's part of it, but hasn't he learned anything from what Jesus has been trying to tell him for 3 years? Yeah. Ah. Yeah. Absolutely. And when push comes to shove, what do? You fall back on your old habits. You fall back on your old ways of doing things. Peter would just as soon deck a man as save him, okay? There's others like that. One of the early Methodist preachers, Peter Cartwright, was known for that. If he couldn't save you, he'd punch you. Okay, he ran against Abraham Lincoln for Congress in Illinois and almost decked Lincoln, for the whole thing. Jesus' kingdom's not about that. Yeah. Yeah, it's a reaction, isn't it, Pam? It exactly is. You push me, I'm going to push you. Okay, and so there's about to be this rumble at the Garden of Gethsemane, different from a rumble in Madison Square Garden. Jesus' kingdom is about something entirely different, though, isn't it? His kingdom is not about overcoming evil with evil. His kingdom is about overcoming evil with good, but the disciples still don't get it, do they? What does verse 50 to 52 tell us? It tells us the followers of Jesus then did what? Everybody fled, okay? Including a young man who lost his shirt and everything else, apparently, in the melee, running off naked in the night just to get away. Who is that young man, by the way? Yeah, some scholars say it is John Mark himself. It's possible. We don't know for sure. Well, in either case, what's interesting is the parallel which we can begin to see. Keller draws it. It's a really interesting one between this garden, the Garden of Gethsemane, and another garden, the Garden of Eden. For what happens at Eden? People are given a test, Adam and Eve. They flunk it, and they end up fleeing in naked shame. But Jesus does not fail this test. when the moment of his arrest comes, Jesus makes it plain that the only way to keep faith with God's kingdom is to lay down the swords and step away from the weapons of this world. So while everybody else is scattered to the winds, Jesus simply submits to those who have come to arrest him and to kill him. How can he do that? He knows there is a better kingdom. He's come from it. A kingdom which appears to be a little topsy-turvy to the values of this world, but which actually embraces the values that last. So, let's see. Verse 53. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes were assembled. Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards, warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priest and the whole council were looking for a testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. Many gave false testimony against him. Their testimony did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another one not made with hands.'" But even on this point, their testimony didn't agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and he asked Jesus, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" Jesus was silent and did not answer. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power, coming with the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy." What's the blasphemy there, by the way? What is it Jesus says that's so blasphemous? He says he's God. And how does he say it? I am. Remember, that's God's name. You don't use God's name. You say Adonai. You don't say Yahweh. If you're a Jew, because it's just blasphemous to even say God's name. I am, Jesus says. So all of them condemned him as deserving death. Some began to spit on him, to blindfold him and strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." The guards also took him over and they beat him. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. She saw Peter warming himself. She stared at him and she said, "You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." He denied it, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." He went out into the forecourt. Then the cock crowed. And the servant girl, on seeing him, began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again, he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them. You are a Galilean." How would they know that? His accent gives them away. You know, you can't get away from it, can you? You know, anybody who listens to Peter and Pamela talk will know they're not from East Texas. Okay, they just can't be. Peter began to curse. He swore an oath. "I don't know this man you're talking about." That moment the cock crowed for the second time. Then Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he broke down and he wept. So, Jesus has come to see Caiaphas, the high priest. And how successful is he in lining up witnesses against Jesus? Not very successful. Because their testimonies don't agree. And Georgia could tell you as an attorney that if you can get witnesses to differ on their account, then you put everything into question, don't you? Now, I just got to say, no good defense attorney today would ever have let Jesus do this, okay? This is not an American system of justice. one in which a person is innocent until proven guilty. This is a kangaroo court, isn't it? Look at it, meeting after midnight in the house of the high priest, moments after being charged and arrested. Now, where does the high priest live? He's probably somewhere in the upper city. If you look, you can see this is the temple there, and the lower city's down here. The city of David's going to be further down. The upper city is here. It's probably upper city because it's on some hills. So there's actually a little valley called it goes right between the temple and those upper city homes. So to make it convenient for folks, they have built a kind of a viaduct, a bridge between the Temple Mount and the upper city. That's where most of the priests live. That's where most of the leading citizens live. That's where the wealthy live. It's there because they'll get some breeze up on that hill that is coming, if you can imagine, all the way from the Mediterranean. Okay, it's gonna reach there. Okay, they get the breeze. What does everybody else who lives down here get? Nothing. Okay, no breeze, no cooling air. It's hot down there. Okay, each home is in this upper city. Has a courtyard that is built with 2 or more stories. Let's see if we can figure it out. Okay, so there's going to be a central courtyard in these homes. Then there's going to be a second story. Central courtyard will be where you would come in from there, and then you would come into that area. This particular house is thought to be the residence of Annas and Caiaphas. It is a reconstruction of a mansion that was found in the upper city. Can you imagine? This was about 6,500 square feet. I mean, that's bigger than the houses over, well, you know where. It's destroyed in 70 AD after the Jewish uprising. But this courtyard in the middle is where Peter has come in and is warming himself, and ends up denying Jesus 3 times. It's not a good night for old Peter, is it? First he falls asleep 3 times, then he denies he even knows Jesus 3 times, and we ought to say it's not. He calls down curses upon the people around him. Okay, he has fully slipped, hasn't he? He is backsliding all the way back to being a very brash, coarse fisherman from the Sea of Galilee, not at all a follower of the Christ. And so inside the house, probably up on the second story, Caiaphas has turned to Jesus and asked him point blank, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the One?" Jesus has said, "I am." And then he goes even further. "You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, coming on the clouds of heaven." Why does he add that? It is to suggest that the Messiah or the Christ is also the Son of Man who will come according to Daniel and other places. And he will come, what? As the divine judge one day. Now here's an irony, isn't it? Jesus in effect says to the judge of the kangaroo court, the high priest, "Sorry, Charlie, but I'm the real judge here." Okay, that absolutely sends the priest and everyone around him in the room into a frenzy. Okay, the high priest begins tearing his clothes. That's a sign of mourning and anger. And everybody else follows suit. They spit on Jesus and they beat him. They go absolutely berserk. So are they overreacting here? Well, remember, this is the same group that's had it in for Jesus for some time now. And so it finally all comes to a head. Only there's one little problem here. As powerful as they are, they do not have the power to issue a death sentence. Why not? Yeah, they're under Roman occupation. And the Romans have said, you can do whatever you want to on your little laws and your religious stuff. We don't care. But you can't kill somebody. That's our prerogative. Okay. So that means the chief priests and the scribes need who? They need the Roman governor, which is who? Yeah, you know that from the Creed. He's crucified under Pontius, the Pilate, not an airplane, Pontius Pilate. So let's read on. Mark 15. As soon as it was morning, this is all one night this is happening. As soon as it was morning, the chief priest held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They have called the Sanhedrin together at the last minute. The Sanhedrin are the 70 ruling elders of the nation of Israel. They bound Jesus, led him away, handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him, "You say so." Then the chief priest accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you." Jesus made no further reply. Pilate was amazed. Now at the festival, this is the Passover feast, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" He realized it was out of jealousy that the chief priest had handed him over. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again, "Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call king of the Jews?" They shouted, "Crucify him!" Pilate asked them, "Why? What evil has he done?" They shouted all the more, "Crucify him!" So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. So where are we now? We've gone from the house of Caiaphas to Pilate's home. Now Pontius Pilate, he's a Roman. He doesn't even like Jerusalem. It's backwards. It's full of religious people. He doesn't know anything about them. He doesn't understand them. Pilate spends most of his time at Caesarea Maritima, out on the coast of the Mediterranean. Much better breezes there. Much cooler climate, and there's Roman influences. If you go to Israel, you'll see it's a Roman city. It's a Greco-Roman city. There's a hippodrome for horse racing. There's a Colosseum. There's all the trappings of a civilized country, and not like the backwater of Jerusalem. Okay, that's where Pontius Pilate likes to stay. But he goes to Jerusalem every year, a couple times, because he's the governor, and he goes during Passover every year because that's the biggest feast of the year. And he goes to just sort of keep an eye on what's going on. So when he goes to Jerusalem, he will either stay in the palace built by Herod the Great, which is going to be over here somewhere. They've been here at the house of Caiaphas. They started down here at the Mount of Olives, and then they've been at Caiaphas. So he's either staying here at Herod's palace, but Herod's probably there too this time. So he doesn't stay at Herod's palace when Herod's there. He doesn't even like Herod. So he will go instead and stay in the Praetorium, that is the Antonio fortress. It's over here on the back side of the Temple Mount. It's where the Roman forces are barracked and garrisoned. So he's staying in the Antonio fortress. Here's a model of it. Huge place. It's very impressive, which serves as the Roman headquarters. Now, Mark doesn't tell us in his rather brief account. John adds a little detail in his version, which is that when the Jewish leaders got to the governor's quarters, despite having what they thought was a pretty ironclad case, they still had to stop short of entering Pilate's headquarters for a particular reason. What would that reason have been? It's Passover. Pilate is a Gentile. He's a Roman. The Jews are prohibited from going into the home of a Gentile if they want to stay ceremonially pure, ritually clean. So they can go to Pilate's courtyard. They have to stop there. And Pilate in turn has to come out to them. Now, do you get the feeling that Pilate is just more than happy to do that? It's early in the morning. He hasn't even finished his post-toasties. Okay. He hasn't had breakfast, and here are these locals at his doorstep, banging on the door, bringing a complaint. Don't you hate it when that happens? When you start your day that way? There are days when before I even get up, I'm in trouble. You know, I don't. Somebody's got something, and they're already mad. And I thought, I can't even get from the car into the office sometimes before somebody's mad about something, and they're ready to talk. I have a little sympathy for Pilate here. Pilate is unimpressed with the case that they make against Jesus. So he tries to do some in run against them. You know, Luke tells us that Pilate first tries to pass the buck, and he says, "Oh, you're from Galilee. You know who's from Galilee? Herod." That's who you should be talking to, Herod, King Herod. Why don't you go see him? And they haul Jesus across town to see Herod. Herod is, interested in Jesus because he's heard about him. He's kind of a miracle worker. He says to Jesus, "Do something, great. Do a little trick here. Something. Just." And Jesus just kind of ignores Herod. He's ridiculous. Herod says, "I don't want to." Sends him back over to Pilate. Okay, when he comes back to Pilate, Pilate says, "Okay. We have the annual Passover amnesty program. This has not been passed, by the way, as a bill of the Roman Senate. It is an executive order that Pilate has. We have Passover amnesty. And so, I can release anybody that you want." He picks the worst person he can possibly think of, Barabbas. Barabbas, who is a madman, who's a maniac, who's a murderer, who's just a rabid kind of guy. And he says, "So would you like Barabbas, really, or would you like Jesus released to you?" And what's the crowd's response? Give us Barabbas. Now, I used to think, what happens between Sunday and Friday that the crowd that is saying, "Hosanna in the highest, blessed is he who comes in the Lord, save us," is now saying, "Crucify him, give us Barabbas"? And then I figured out it isn't the same people. Okay. The crowd around the palace on a Friday morning is not the same crowd that was at the city gates welcoming Jesus. Who's there? Everybody that the chief priests have rallied up to come there. Now, this happens occasionally at church meetings. I don't know. Where one side has a grudge and they get everybody on their side. You got to come to this meeting because we're going to get them. And other people are. I don't know. I think it happens in church meetings. And so this is what's happening here. The chief priests have got all of their supporters, and they're all saying, "The other guy. Yeah, vote for the other guy. Vote for the other guy. Give us Barabbas." And so Pilate acquiesces. Now, Matthew will add that he quite literally washes his hands of the thing. This is not about hygiene. This is about theater. This is about drama. Deuteronomy 21:1-9 tells us that if a murder victim is found in open country, that the elders of the nearby village are to measure the distance from the victim to all the surrounding villages to see which village he's closest to. Okay, and then. Whichever one it is, they say, he's your problem. Okay. And the elders in that village are then told to sacrifice a calf and then wash their hands over that cow as they declare their innocence, saying, "Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done." Okay. That's what Pilate's doing here. I didn't do this. It's not me. I'm washing my hands of the whole thing. It's up to you, and it's going to be on your heads. And the crowd says, okay, let his blood be on us and our children. When they say that, Pilate has what he wants from them. So he hands Jesus over to the soldiers who mock him and take him out to then be crucified. Let's read on. Verse 21. Verse 16. The soldiers led him into the courtyard of the palace. They called together the whole cohort. They clothed him in a purple cloak. After twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on him. They began to salute him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They struck his head with a reed, spat upon him, knelt down in homage to him. And after mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. Now they compelled a passerby who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, and they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it, and they crucified him and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take. So is Simon of Cyrene just about the unluckiest tourist in Jerusalem that day? I mean, talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's come from Cyrene. That's an island, okay? He's not from around those parts. He's come to Jerusalem probably because he's ethnically Jewish, and he's come for Passover, and he's in the big city, and there's all this excitement, and he's just, well, what's happening over there? You know, he gets a little too close, and they grab him. Okay, I'm trying to imagine when he gets home, his wife saying, "Why were you even there? Okay, why did you get so close? You know, why didn't you just leave it alone?" Talking about being in the wrong place. Yet sometimes God has a different plan for our lives, doesn't he? Mark, really uncharacteristically for himself, because Mark, remember, stubby fingers. He writes clipped style, really abbreviated. He gives us a detail here that isn't given by anybody else. But what does Mark say? He says, Simon is the father of Alexander and Rufus. Why would he say that? Because Alexander and Rufus are known to Mark's readers. Later on, St. Paul will mention to the Romans that a man named Rufus is chosen in the Lord, that Rufus, his mother, had been a mother to me too, Paul will say, Romans 16. We know from Acts 2 that among those who were touched by the Holy Spirit at Pentecost were men from Cyrene. So Simon's chance encounter may not be quite so chance after all. Let's keep going. Verse 25, it was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." With him they crucified two bandits, one on his right, one on the left. Those who were passed by derided him, shaking their hands and their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Save yourself. Come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying, he saved others. He can't save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now so that we may see and believe. They're not going to see and believe, are they? Even if he does that? No. Those who were being crucified with him also taunted him. Keller points out there's a theme here that begins with the arrest at night and the midnight trial. It's the theme of darkness, isn't it? Because when Jesus dies, what happens? When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of the bystanders heard it. They said, "Listen, he's calling for Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let's see whether the prophet Elijah will come and take him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw it this way, he breathed his last. He said, truly this was God's Son. Something profound happening here, isn't there? What does it mean that the curtain separating the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple is torn in half, from top to bottom? Keller suggests this was God's way of saying, this is the sacrifice that ends all sacrifices. This way is now open to approach me. That's a rather astounding claim, isn't it? Remember that since the curtain surrounding the Holy of Holies from the days of the tabernacle was meant to separate God's Shekinah presence from everybody else. In other words, you don't go behind the curtain. That's where God lives. That's where his Holy of Holies presence is. Who goes there? Oh, only one man, only one day a year, Yom Kippur, the high priest, the Day of Atonement. He can go in there and he can pray for the whole nation and make atonement for them. But that's only one day for one man. The rest of the time, stay out. This is God's kingdom. This is God's presence. This is his glory behind this curtain. So what happens when the curtain is torn from top to bottom? What does that mean? Yeah, anybody can go into God's presence now. It's amazing, isn't it? All of a sudden, that which has been kept behind a curtain for centuries is open to anybody. And who is the first person to take advantage of the fact the barrier is now down? It's the centurion. It's the Roman Gentile soldier who confesses in Mark 15:39, Jesus surely is the Son of God. Now, Keller points out that up until this point in Mark's gospel, nobody else has got this figured out nearly so clearly. The disciples have called him Christ, but in the culture of the day, the Christ is not necessarily divine. It just means the anointed one, the Messiah, the one chosen of God. The only ones who have realized who he is are the demons, right? They've got it. That's why Jesus keeps telling them to shut up and be quiet. And then this hardened Roman soldier executioner sees it as well. What causes him to get it when nobody else has? What do you think? I mean, he doesn't even know all this stuff. He doesn't even know the Jewish prophecies and all that stuff. He doesn't have a clue about the Jewish religion. He's just an executioner. He's posted to the province of Judea maybe for 2 years, and he's doing his time. Then he's going back home to Rome. How does he get it when nobody else does? He sees him die. And he sees him die in a way unlike anybody else he's ever seen die. He's seen a lot of people die. He's an executioner. But something about this one touches him. And all of a sudden, maybe because that curtain has been torn in two and the veil has been opened and the access is now there, even the Roman soldier gets it. This is the Christ. Truly this man was the Son of God. Well, that brings us to chapter 18 in Keller's book, called, promisingly enough, The Beginning. Mark is clear that Jesus has really died. That's the whole point of the encounter with Joseph of Arimathea, who's going to ask Pilate for permission to bury the body of Jesus. He's not going to do that if Jesus is not really dead, okay? Jesus is laid out in the tomb, Joseph's tomb. It's never been used before. That sounds funny, but they were used over and over again. And on the third day, some of the women come, bringing along with them the kind of spices you would use to anoint a dead body. Despite all the time Jesus has told them he will be killed, and on the third day, he will rise once more. He's told them this numerous times, hasn't he? All the way through. Nobody expects it. Isn't that weird? It is unbelievable, isn't it?
Like you told me, the Martians are coming from the land right here in front of
Okay.
you on this day.
And if they did, you would say, where is that Steven Spielberg? Yeah, it is unbelievable. The women don't go to the tomb to check up on Jesus and see if the promises came true, do they? They go to anoint a dead body. Okay. They also go, and on the way they figure out, oh, there's that 2-ton stone that would be blocking the tomb. Could be a problem for us. But they're church ladies, get out of their way. Okay. Nobody thinks the promises are coming true, but they do. So Keller asked a rather pertinent question that we might pose as well. What if you believe that the resurrection is true? What then? Does the resurrection mean anything for your life right now? It has to change it, doesn't it? I mean, because it's not supposed to happen, and it happens. So you got to go back and recalibrate, rethink a lot of stuff, because this has happened. Keller writes this, at the bottom of page 223. It's good. If you can't dance, and you long to dance, in the resurrection, you'll dance perfectly. I'm in that category, by the way. Julie and I took dance lessons from a place in Tomball called the Cutter Rug Dance Studio, and their motto was, "If you have 2 left feet, bring them to us, and we'll make it right." Yeah. If you're lonely, in the resurrection, you will have perfect love. If you're empty in the resurrection, you will be fully satisfied. Ordinary life is what is going to be redeemed. And if you know that, then guess what? You can take all kinds of risk right now, can't you? Or you can face the worst things imaginable. Can face them with hope. So Keller concludes, live in the light of the resurrection and the renewal of this world and of yourself in a glorious, never-ending, joyful dance of grace. And this is, as Tolkien said, the underlying reality to which all stories point. The ultimate story that shows victory coming out of defeat. Some other time, we'll talk about why it is that Mark seems to forget something in chapter 16. So much so that someone later on feels like they have to add to it. I mean, he's got everything, but he hasn't spelled it out quite as clearly. Mark also forgets Christmas, by the way. He doesn't ever give you any of that. But he has something still to say about the resurrection. Okay, comments or questions as we close tonight? The Gospel of Mark, a powerful little book, written to people in a hurry, people who needed to know one thing: resurrection is real. There's people in a hurry today who need to know that same thing. I hope you'll be somebody who will tell them about it. This is the end of our study in Keller's book. I want to tell you that in a couple of weeks, on December 14th, we're going to do a special Advent study on an Advent journey. And what I want to do is take us physically from Nazareth down to Bethlehem. We'll be doing some of that in the morning sermons during December, but I also want to show you some of it visually, and also point out part of what makes this such an incredible journey, both for those who take it the first time and for us who can take it every year if we want to. So you come back on December 14th, 5 o'clock, and we will do that. All right, let's have a word of prayer, and then let's go home. It's been a long day. Lord, if this is all true, we got to rethink a lot of stuff. If you really were raised from the dead, all of what we know to be givens in life is up for grabs. And yet everything tells us, even the little voice inside of us, that it's true. So let us go forth as people who not only know that and rejoice in it, but who can't wait to proclaim it to others as well. Thank you for your time with us, and we commend to you the rest of our evening and this week and our Thanksgiving celebrations, and look forward to being back in your house with your people next Sunday as well. In the name of Christ, amen. Amen. Yeah.
Begging the forgiveness of any trustees in the room. I've been asked to take your list on behalf of Porto who have a sweet expression of their gratitude for you that you may pick up on your way out of Christmas.
Oh, how sweet. What are they?
With them for 10 minutes.
It's cupcakes?
Yes, and I'm guessing it's a spice cake.
Oh, how sweet. You know what? Things like that are much better shared. Let's put it on the table right in the foyer. And once you have once you've passed the curtain that separates the Holy of Holies here from the court of the Gentiles, grab a cupcake if you like, spend a few moments in some fellowship, and we'll see you soon. Thanks very much.